Here come the Irish. USC, Notre Dame, exhilarating wins, depressing losses, craziest games. The bigger rival, Notre Dame or UCLA. The Notre Dame Weekender experience. And a USC Notre Dame game preview, finished by our Pac-12 weekly predictions. Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Katz, and welcome to WeAreSC's Inside the Trojans Huddle, week number 8. Inside the Trojans Huddle is a game-like panel discussion with WeAreSC columnists and staff writers. So we start the pregame show as normal. Let's meet our panelists for this week. Scott Schrader, WeAreSC Senior Recruiting Director, who has 19 years of experience of covering the USC Trojans as both a reporter and a USC recruiting authority. Chris Arledge, former William Jewell College defensive back and team captain, and WeAreSC columnist who writes the popular column Musings with Arledge. Kevin Bruce, former All-Pac-8 conference linebacker and team captain for the 1975 USC Trojans. He's a WeAreSC columnist who writes defensively and offensively speaking after every USC game. I'm Greg Katz. I'll be your moderator. I'm a columnist who writes the obvious and not so obvious NIMHO Sunday. So we've been doing the pregame show with the introduction of our panelists. So this is a special edition. It's all devoted basically to USC and Notre Dame, the great intersectional rivalry. So here we go. First quarter. Here come the Irish. It's going to be the 92nd meeting between USC and Notre Dame. Panel, what makes this cross-country rivalry so great even when one or both teams are having a challenging season? We'll start off with Mr. Scott Schrader.
Well, I think this is one of those rivalries that there's so much history and great tradition involved with this game. This is just coming from my perspective, I didn't go to USC, but I grew up around USC football. My dad covered the football team, took me back to South Bend in 1977, where I still have a scar on my hand from a little incident there outside the Holiday Inn. And, I sat there and I watched Joe Montana and Joe McAfee play pitch and catch that year. But, when you go to Notre Dame, especially, and you get to experience the environment there and what this game is all about, you really get a true understanding of it. And so I don't think that, obviously it's enhanced when USC and Notre Dame are both ranked in the top 10, the top 5 or whatever that might be. But I think this game, and I know just talking to the guys that I know that went to Notre Dame and cover the Notre Dame football team, they still look forward to this game every year. And so do I. And I'm sure everybody on this panel is going to agree with that.
Well, let's find out if everyone will agree with that. Chris Arledge, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. This is not only my favorite USC game every year, but it's my favorite sporting event. I love USC Notre Dame. And I wrote about it a little bit this week. There's something different about this rivalry than every other rivalry, even the great ones. Oklahoma and Texas are right next to each other. There's not all that much difference between the state of Texas and the state of Oklahoma, although people here and there seem to think otherwise. There's not much difference. Michigan and Ohio, these are the same places. Alabama, Auburn are in the same state. USC Notre Dame is a rivalry that spans the country, and we're talking about two very different types of places, two very different types of institutions. It makes it different and special in a way that the regional rivalries are not. So this is not going to be the greatest USC Notre Dame game. They're probably not going to write songs about this one, but it still matters, and it still matters in a special way. And I wouldn't miss it. Although I've thought about not going back to South Bend this year, but just because I don't want to deal with the pain in person, it's easier at home. But I'm going to be there, and I love it.
Well, what's not to love? Certainly a very interesting perspective. Kevin, you have a very interesting perspective. You have played in the game. You have played at Notre Dame. You played in the Coliseum. But maybe from a player's perspective, if one or both teams isn't great, is it still as great for players?
It is. Yeah. It's one of those trick questions. Yeah, it is. And I've talked to many players, recent vintages, right? And they see it as very special. Now, some of the performances haven't been all that special. Some have, a few. But for the most part, recent to history has not been kind to USC for all kinds of reasons. But this rivalry is special. And it's special in many respects. I think Chris touched on some of it. It is geographically very dispersed. So you have the evil leprechauns from Notre Dame, Midwest based, but a national school, really. National school, everywhere I've gone in my business career, outside the state of California, trust me, they don't really care about UCLA one way or the other. Frankly, I feel much the same way. But they do care about Notre Dame. And so every year, of course, I get bombed with emails. I get bombed with emails that, want to get a piece of my hide with respect to the game and the outcome. So that's how special it is. It'd be nice that we would put a product on the field that will be competitive and might surprise some people this Saturday. Chris, I'm glad you're going, and I got to tell you what, I'm glad I'm not.
Wow, that was an interesting take. Okay, I'll tell you how I feel about it. Once it was established with Howard Jones and Knute Rockne, and remembering, I think it was 1931, SC upset Notre Dame in South Bend, and I have a photo of it actually that'll be that I've run, which shows you 300,000 people having a parade for the Trojans upon their return from South Bend after that victory. I think it was established right there and then that this was going to be a big rivalry game. It seems like every other decade, somebody is beating somebody for 3 or 4 times in a row, and it ebbs and flows. But I think because it was established so long ago, that it's still SC and Notre Dame. I think if you've been to games at both places, it's as different as night and day. The crowds are different as night and day. At the Coliseum, I mean, when I was growing up, it seemed like half the Coliseum was for Notre Dame. Half the tailgaters were Notre Dame. When you go back to Notre Dame, it's just incredible. We'll talk about that later. But it's really perpetuates itself. It's not a game, in my opinion. It's an event. And there's very few events that live up to it. This one does. And I've covered Super Bowls and everything else, World Series games. This is right there with it. So it's an interesting concept, which takes us to the second quarter. In your experience, panel, and I think this is actually a pretty good series of questions, your most exhilarating USC win over Notre Dame, your most depressing loss to Notre Dame, and your craziest USC Notre Dame game that you've experienced. So, Chris, we know you're going back to Notre Dame this weekend. Let's start off with you answering those 3 questions.
We'll start with most exhilarating. To me, this is easy. I think there are 2 possible answers, but I was a year old in 1974. Sorry, Kevin. So the comeback game can't qualify for me. The most exhilarating USC Notre Dame game was the Bush Push game in 2005. USC had won, 20 something straight games, back-to-back national championships. And we got to the campus early that day and saw all kinds of banners all over talking about all the various streaks that Notre Dame had broken over the years. Oklahoma football winning streak, UCLA basketball. That place was amped at 10 or 11 a.m. that morning. And to be in that situation where the crowd on 3rd and 19, again on 4th and 9, when the crowd was going absolutely insane because they thought for sure that the Irish finally were going to get us, to watch Notre Dame fans storm the field and then be pushed off to the sideline, merely to have their hearts ripped out. There was nothing like it. And when I go to the games back there, I meet 2 friends of mine that played at Notre Dame. sadly. And one of them, two-time All-American named Luther Bradley, wasn't able to speak for about 2 hours after that game. He couldn't get a word out, and it made my heart warm. It still does, just thinking about the pain that he had to endure that day, especially knowing what's probably coming for me Saturday. But yeah, that one was special.
Well, that was, how did you meet, by the way, how did you meet Luther Bradley? Just kind of curious.
Through a mutual friend that also played at Notre Dame. A friend of mine, Rod McNeil, a teammate of Kevin's once upon a time, is friends with a guy named Danny Nod who played at Notre Dame. Danny is best friends with Luther Bradley, so that's how I got to know those guys, and good guys, even if they are Irish.
For those of you on the podcast or young, Luther Bradley was an All-America safety, I believe, for Notre Dame, and was a tremendous player. All right, Kevin, we probably should have saved you for last, but we're going to go with you here. So I guess you're going to look at it from a player's perspective. So your thoughts?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Wow. Look behind me. And that's to Chris's point. He was 1 year old, but he still remembers the game. So that could have been his first childhood memory. But that was the 74 comeback victory in the Coliseum. Incredible experience. We played a pretty pedestrian first half, to put it mildly. Offense was pitiful, only exceeded by the atrocious defense the way we played. And I was playing strong side, inside linebacker, and it was just a mess. It truly was. And we got our act together at halftime. There's a whole bunch of stories I could tell about that, but nonetheless, we made a few little defensive adjustments in particular. I don't think we made many adjustments on the offense. We didn't have to. We just needed to go do things right. On defense, we had to make some adjustments. We have done some special things for Notre Dame that were just not well tooled. Let's just put it that way. And to hang 55 straight, 35 in the third quarter points on Notre Dame was truly special. And to do that when teams were ranked number 4 and number 5, with a lot on the line, that was the time to do it. So it was very special, also very crazy. And I've got some post-game stories that I'll save for another time that just add to that whole experience. But it was just one of those event of events. And Greg, I like the way you put it. This game is an event. It's a lot going on here. And this was a very special outcome. It'll go down in lore, and everybody will say, "Where were you, Daddy, when the Trojans, put 55 straight on Notre Dame?" And there'll be an answer. Chris's answer is he was in the stroller, but that's all right.
Well, you got that one in there, Kev. Now let me ask you, Kevin, what was the most depressing loss? Not just that you played in, but in general, what did you find as the most depressing?
Well, any of them are depressing, but to Chris's point, but importantly, the 55-0, I was just a wee lad at the time on that one. And, but I'll never forget how the humiliation. I don't know, I'm really sure I was a real diehard SC fan at the time, but when that happened, I became one because I thought that was just atrocious and very, a dagger in the heart. But as it turned out, it was a watershed game because it caused Coach McKay to change his recruiting methods at that time. And he went for not just the biggest and meanest, but the fastest players he could find. And that was the legacy that continued on it and through my playing time.
And what about your most craziest SC Notre Dame memory? 74.
It just is. It was just, it was crazy. Though I'll tell you, there's a story on the 1975 game where we went back to South Bend that I'll save for later, but it's related to that question.
Just a point of history for those of you that are listening on the podcast. Behind Kevin is a picture of the scoreboard of the 74 USC Notre Dame game, about 5:49 remaining. A little tidbit, that scoreboard picture was taken by a friend of mine named Arnold Frankel. And Arnold Frankel used to take pictures for USC. And Arnold, his nephew is Gary Klein, who covered USC football for the Los Angeles Times. He covers the Rams now.
Yeah.
And I know as a birthday gift to me, Arnold decided to take that scoreboard and turn it into a clock.
Yeah.
So for my birthday, I have a clock that is that scoreboard. So an interesting sidebar. Scott, your three memories.
Well, yeah, I would. My first memory of a real memory of being at a college football game was the 1974 USC Notre Dame football game. I was tagging along with my mom. My dad's in the press box. My mom and there were usually two other people that went with us every game. And I don't remember vivid details of it, but I definitely remember halftime. Pretty much thinking the game was over in my mind as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old kid, whatever I was. But I will never forget, even though I was on the younger side, just what happened in that second half. And, obviously watching videos over the years has kind of ingrained it. And maybe some of the memories that I thought I had all the way back then maybe are just the end result of watching some stuff on television and video replays. But, that was definitely the most exhilarating memory of USC Notre Dame, just from the standpoint that it was really the first football game I remember being at. But, 2005 obviously is going to rank up there, the Bush Push game. But, it was really interesting. I was with a Notre Dame friend of mine in 2002. And he had brought a couple of his Notre Dame friends with him. And at the time, I think this was just before I started working with WeAreSC back in the scout.com days. And I just remember there were some young kids, Notre Dame fans, LA dudes, and they're talking smack. I won't use the profanity word, but and just talking about USC's going to get their ass kicked. USC sucks. The whole this and that coming from these high school kids. Of course, they really weren't all that wrong, right? It had been a rough road for USC, but I just remember them going back into the stands and watching that football game happen. And it was just, and I'm not the biggest USC fan, so to speak, like everybody else is here. I didn't go to USC. I didn't play for USC. So I won't have like a depressing loss because I've never really been that upset over any loss that USC's had. But, that I will stick to that 74 game most exhilarating, but I'll put 2002, which will stick in my mind for other reasons. And I think that just kind of, USC went on to win the Orange Bowl that year. But I think that victory over Notre Dame, USC was finally in the BC, right? That was kind of a big deal back then. And so it just kind of was a moment of I think, great history for USC football on what that ultimately led to.
Okay, well, I've got three perspectives. Actually, a point of information, Chris, I'm just slightly older than Kevin, but thank you for not putting me on the spot. But I'm going to date myself here. First of all,
you look so young, though, Greg. That's why I didn't know.
Yeah,
I can tell Kevin is old. I couldn't tell you're old.
He's warming up now. Okay, I'm going to agree with all of you. I think this. I've been going to USC Notre Dame games since 1962. Okay, and that was the first time I saw the Trojans, the Irish, play in the Coliseum, and the Irish had a quarterback named Daryl LaMonica that became quite an NFL player. But of all the games that I've seen, the most exhilarating win was at South Bend in 2005. And I have never heard Notre Dame Stadium any louder. It was an insane asylum. It was deafening. And to pull off the 4th and 9 pass and get an audible in from Leinart to Jarrett is simply amazing that they were able to not only do the audible, but to complete the pass. But the one memory I have of that game is I remember leaving Notre Dame Stadium, and usually the people at Notre Dame are very gracious. They're very holy in their minds, right? I have never heard the Notre Dame fans as Excuse me, Scott, I hope I don't offend your ears. So pissed off. It was unbelievable. We're dropping F-bombs like World War II over London. It was incredible. So that was my most exhilarating win, to see them in such misery. And of course, SC was going for a national championship run. My most depressing loss was not actually a loss. It was a tie. In 1969, or excuse me, 68, USC played Notre Dame in the Coliseum, and USC was number 1 and Notre Dame was like number 9. And all my buddies on the football team, we had gotten season tickets. We sat behind the end zone because they had a special deal for high school students. So there was about 19 of us sitting there behind the end zone. And Notre Dame had a great quarterback named Terry Hanratty, who was injured on crutches. So they had to go with a young sophomore quarterback named Joe Theismann. And Notre Dame at that time was an all-boys school. And what I remember about that game was that it tied. They stuffed Simpson. He couldn't run. Notre Dame was so physical. It's one of those things where you look in the game program, and you look at the Notre Dame players, and they all look like they were spending time at Folsom Prison. Okay, they were just absolutely mugshot intimidating. The craziest game, I won't belabor the point, it's the 1974 game, the comeback game. It was like a schizophrenic game. I've never heard the Coliseum as loud in the second half, or maybe ever, hearing that game. I can imagine as a player down on the field, it was like watching a silent movie. There was so much noise. So that were my relations to wins, losses, craziest games. So,
Hey, Greg.
yes, sir.
I was just going to say, I want to give a shout out to a game that has no historical significance to anybody but a USC fan. It's not like 74 or 2005, but that 1996 streak breaking game, after 13 years of absolute hell putting up with the Irish, after blowing, what was it, a 17-point lead to UCLA the week before, that team was a wreck. The season was a wreck. Notre Dame was a good but not great team. I think they're ranked about number 10. And it took all kinds of miracles for USC to win that game, including a missed extra point in the fourth quarter that would have sealed it. Other than the 2005 game, I'm not sure I've ever felt that much joy at a USC game. I mean, that was just the relief of finally beating those guys after all those years was remarkable. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget looking around and seeing the USC fans, some of them weeping because they were so happy to finally beat the Irish. That was great.
I don't know if they were weeping. I think they were weeping because of that. They're also weeping because it was so freaking cold and windy at that game. Here's a trivia question, then we'll move on. Who was the linebacker that tipped the ball at the end in overtime, and where was he from?
Mark Cusano, he was from Texas, and Cusano also got him the following year in South Bend in '97. He also batted down a pass late in that game too.
Well, that's impressive, Chris, but you got to tell me where he went to high school in Texas.
Oh, man.
That's your Jeopardy question. You got 2 seconds.
I'll go with Allen. Texas.
You know, that was very close. It was the Colony.
Okay.
The Colony. But that was good. That was good. So let's on to halftime. Age-old question. It's been dated. It's been, I think, since the beginning of time. Our halftime question is: who is USC's biggest rival? Is it Notre Dame or is it UCLA? So, Kevin, let's get a player's perspective. Which is it?
Yeah, it's not even. It's not a contest, guys. It's Notre Dame. I mean, UCLA is one of those. Well, as Coach McKay, his famous quote, hell is losing to UCLA and heaven is beating Notre Dame.
That's pretty good. That pretty much sums it up, doesn't it?
Yep, sure does.
Chris, what do you think?
Oh, I'm with Kevin. I also think it's not close. The UCLA game is important. It's fun, but it's not close to USC Notre Dame. And I suspect it's sort of the way Michigan fans feel about the Michigan State rivalry. You have an obligation to beat those guys. You're surrounded by them. They have a little brother complex. They're irritating. You have to beat them. And if you don't beat them, then that's shameful and embarrassing and you feel bad and you have to put up with a bunch of nonsense. But you're supposed to beat them. Your real rival is the team that you're not necessarily supposed to beat, because they're just as good as you are and they're just as important as you are. And that's what makes that game far more meaningful to me.
All right, Scotty, you may look at it from a recruiting perspective, but what's your thoughts on this?
I mean, from a recruiting perspective, I mean, but that goes back to what I just heard come out of Chris's mouth, where you have to beat UCLA, and reasons are you have the bragging rights, and you do have recruiting implications, but I think again. I think that, if you look historically, USC, even when they're losing at times to UCLA, which hasn't been kind of consistent for quite a few years now, USC still seems like they're the top school for most of the kids in Southern California and on the West Coast. So it's not like there's huge implications on the line with recruiting. So I will agree that it's Notre Dame, and it's just because both of these teams have won national championships. Both of these teams, when they have met, have been ranked in the top 10 several times, even higher than that. And I just think you're looking at programs, and USC, it's been a rough 10 years for USC since Pete Carroll's left. But, it's even for somebody like myself looking at it, it's just really a no-brainer that it has to be Notre Dame.
Well, I'll tell you how I think of it. UCLA is like a hemorrhoid. And sometimes you just sit there and say, you know what, it'll go away. It generally does. And then it might come back and then it might not come back. But, USC sees itself, and rightfully so, with all the national championships and everything, as one of the true blue bloods of college football historically. We don't think of UCLA that way. UCLA is not a measuring stick. By any means. And when SC plays Notre Dame, you're talking about two major national, you name the adjective that they are. And to me, Notre Dame is the rivalry game to me because it's the measuring stick. UCLA is annoying. When I say annoying, it's because they like to pretend they like football, but they really don't care. They care about basketball. We all know that. So I'm going with Notre Dame. And I think when we lose to Notre Dame, it tells us what we got to do to get better.
I got one more thing to add.
Sure.
If this was another thing I was going to say and I forgot. When you're facing Notre Dame, you're almost kind of competing for who has the most NFL draft picks or number one picks in the NFL draft. You're competing for Heisman Trophy, who has the most Heisman Trophy winners. You're also, you factor all of that into the equation, the awards that have been won by players and by the teams. And I think you all add that up, and it just makes it such an easy choice.
Well, yeah, when you're UCLA, it's basically we've given back as many Heismans as they've won. So there you go.
Modern day.
And Beeben in a recent poll was the lowest ranked Heisman winner of all time. So he wasn't even a good one. By the way, Greg, I think that's the most personal medical information you've ever disclosed on this show. So I appreciate you being transparent with us about your hemorrhoid problem.
And I appreciate that. A little compassion goes a long way in my eyes. All righty. This one. Into the third quarter we go. Your memories of the Notre Dame Weekender. There's a lot of people that make this an annual pilgrimage every other year. And I don't think people that haven't made this trip understand the event. It's not just a day in South Bend. It begins generally for many people on Thursday and runs all the way through Sunday. There's a lot of events. There's a lot of happenings. So since you guys have all been there, I've been there. Scott, you're going to be at the game, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Well,
so why don't you
have Jackson Dart's going? Excuse me.
All right. So tell our listeners and our viewers, for someone who's not been to the game, give us kind of your agenda, let's say, for this week and what you plan to do and when you plan to get there. So that people that haven't been to the game have kind of an idea of what's happening.
Yeah, this year might be a little bit different for me than it has been in some years, in that I'll probably be coming from Atlanta, Georgia on Saturday morning, and then hooking up with Eric and Mark Colkin on Saturday morning to head to South Bend. But we will be heading to South Bend at like 9:30 in the morning to get even for us covering the game. We're going to get there extra early. But I can just tell you, the first time I really enjoyed the whole Notre Dame event experience was getting there on a Thursday and getting there in time to go to the Navy Pier and be there for the rally and the band and enjoying Chicago. And you really get an amazing group of USC fans that will this year too. I promise you they will be there this year too for this game, showing up, kind of infiltrating that part of the city. The same thing kind of happened when USC played Notre Dame, Alabama a few years ago. I was actually kind of surprised on how full Dallas had gotten, but that's how Notre Dame USC is every year in Chicago from my perspective. And then you head to the game. Every year I still go tour the campus. I still go to the grotto. I still go see everything again. I eat everything up. I mean, Notre Dame is a place I tell kids that I'm covering on the recruiting trail. If there's a school, even if you don't want to go there, you need to go see Notre Dame. And so that's how I feel about it. I think a lot of this that I was given to from my dad kind of passed on to me. He just loved Notre Dame with every ounce of his being. He loved the people there. And I think we'll go to the people part. You go to Notre Dame, if they're cooking up and they're grilling up ribeyes, they're inviting you in to come eat with them. A very, very friendly, very hospitable group of people the Notre Dame fans are. So it's just a really beautiful experience from start to finish, barring a loss, of course. So it's just something I think it's hard to put into words, but it's something that I highly recommend everybody, USC or Notre Dame fan or not. You got to go to this game.
So Chris, you're going back. So
Yeah.
what is Chris Arledge? When do you leave? What do you have a routine when you go back there?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, we'll get in Friday morning this time, my son and I, into Chicago, and there are Chicago things that he likes to do because he loves the town. And then we'll get on campus relatively early. A couple of things about the Notre Dame game, if you're a USC fan and you haven't been. First of all, you have to go. It really is an unbelievable experience. Nobody does history as well as Notre Dame. And you can feel the history in that place. You really can. And they build that up, and it's different. I've been to the Horseshoe, and it was packed, and it was loud, and it was fun, but it wasn't the same. The Coliseum isn't the same. There's history at the Coliseum, but Notre Dame Stadium is a different kind of place. The other thing about it is, and Scott mentioned the people. I grew up going to USC Notre Dame games at the Coliseum. The Notre Dame fans at the Coliseum are maybe the worst people on earth. I mean, most of them should be imprisoned. They're horrible people. They're drunk. They're loud. They're obnoxious. They're awful, awful people. I expected that when I went to South Bend the first time. And that is not what you get. They are a very friendly, welcoming people. And other than the 2005 game, I had the same experience you did, Greg, with the over-the-top emotional meltdown of the Irish. Other than 2005, we've never been anything other than treated really well. It's very interesting. But that's sort of my perspective on Notre Dame. If you're a USC fan and you haven't been to a game in South Bend, do it. 2 years from now, you need to do it. It's amazing.
It is amazing. I would think it'd be even more amazing if I was playing in the game. Kevin, talk to us about what a player feels like from like the plane trip going back to Chicago or Michigan City, wherever you were staying, and actually the mood, the hotel. What was the bus ride like when the team pulled into Notre Dame? What's it like suiting up in, I think, the locker rooms in those days for you in old Notre Dame Stadium, which I experienced before they did the expansion. What was that like? And then take us what it was like coming onto the field.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me tell you, my senior year, we went back 1975, and we that Friday night, my eventually would have been my bride of now 45 years. She snuck me, and then she had her girlfriend who went to Notre Dame. She had another car. We snuck about 12 or 13 USC guys, my buddies and related folks, over to the bonfire and rally on Notre Dame's campus. And it was wild. We had a great time, I got to tell you. People were friendly, which is quite ironic given that we're wearing our cute little USC team blazers, for the most part, because none of us had any jackets of our own. And we were called out by name and, physical harm was going to come our way and all that kind of stuff. And it was just a blast. Had a great time. Nothing untoward took place. And it was quite an experience. So I, from my own perspective, from that perspective anyway, would echo the same thoughts. It's a great experience. Made much better if you win the game, which we did that year, by the way. As far as coming onto the field and those kinds of locker room deals, look, I have two experiences. One as a sophomore, one as a senior. Sophomore experience, we ended up losing the game, but coming out of the locker room in the first half, some guy leaned over the parapet and said some uncharitable things toward me and probably anybody else. It was sort of a general broadcast, and then proceeded to throw up all over my shoulder pads and my everything. And I had to live with that for about, until we get in at halftime and change out my jersey and such. And then we ended up losing the game. Unfortunately, it was somewhat close, but it was, it just reminded us all, me in particular at the time, since I was the one living in the guy's, vomit, that this is not a place that you want to lose a football game. So as a senior, we were able to, follow on the comeback with, taking care of business in South Bend the following year with Joe Montana at quarterback. So that was a good parting feeling for me, knowing that was my last Notre Dame game that I was going to play in.
Well, I'll tell you, I had a routine every year I would go. I remember taking my dad back to the 1995 game, and SC really had their helmets handed to them. But my routine was I would always want to come in on a Thursday. First, I would go into O'Hare Airport, but then I got sick of that drive from O'Hare to Chicago, but more after the game type of thing. Friday, I would go to the Navy Pier, which was great. But I always decided that some years ago that I was going to do all that, but I wanted to be in South Bend. So I would get a hotel room for Friday night and Saturday night in basically, I don't know if you would call it Southern Michigan, but if you go right underneath the tollway, the Indiana tollway, it becomes Michigan. So I would stay there partially because, when they moved the game to at night, it just trying to write a story, walk out of Notre Dame Stadium at maybe 1:32 in the morning, and the dreadful thought of hour and a half drive back to Chicago was just like, I just don't have it in the tank. I'm just staying. But when I would go to Chicago, I made sure I ate at Harry Carey's or Ditka's restaurant, which I found part of the excitement. I remember one year I was there in Chicago and they had this incredible hailstorm. It was like someone was dropping golf balls onto the street on Michigan Avenue. It was really, I was with my girlfriend and it was like, holy mackerel, we're getting bombarded here. When I'm in South Bend, I always eat on Fridays after I go to the Notre Dame pep rally at a place called Tippy Canoe Place, which is the old Studebaker home. It looks like a castle. And they have great steak and fish and what have you. And it kind of sets the tone. I, like Scott and probably most of you, when I go to Notre Dame in the morning or in the afternoon, I feel it's like Disneyland. I have to go to the Golden Dome. I have to sit there and see the lake. I have to go to the grotto and light a candle for a friend of mine that passed away. And it's almost like I have to do these things. It's like going to Disneyland. If you don't go to Tomorrowland and you go to the other lands, like something's missing. So that's what I do. And I love the Notre Dame band, so I try to catch some of their pregame concert because I do like the music they play. The game is the game. It's exciting, but the overall atmosphere is just like you got to see it to believe it. And everybody's listening, like Chris has said, and Scott. I mean, and Kev, you know what? It's a bucket list. You have to do it. Don't think about it. I have many friends say, "Oh, we're gonna go. I go, no, you gotta just go."
Yep.
So again, for those of you that are going to the game, I hope you have a great time, and I know that you will. So that takes us to the fourth and final quarter. Let's get into it just a little bit about the game on Saturday. It's a 4:30 game, Southern California time on NBC. 7:30. Unfortunately, it's going to be cold and chilly. I checked the forecast. No chance of rain, which is good, but hopefully there's not a lot of wind, because the wind really can set you back. But Chris, in your benevolent wisdom, how do you see this game shaping up on Saturday?
Well, are we going to see a completely different USC team than we've seen the last few games? If so, this is a game that can be won. This is not a great Notre Dame team. They struggle to run the ball. They're pretty average at quarterback. They've struggled with just about everybody they played this year. Now, for the most part, they pulled those games out for the most part. But it's not a great Notre Dame team. And if you can stop the run and force the mediocre quarterbacks to have to throw the ball, and if you cover the tight end occasionally, you can hold them down to a reasonable number. If you win the turnover battle and win some jump balls downfield, you can put some points on the board. USC could win this game. The problem is, for USC to win this game, they actually have to play football. And I haven't seen them play football in a long time, right? What we've seen them go out and get pushed around by people and just roll over and embarrass themselves, right? That's what we've seen. That's what Oregon State was. That's what Utah was. If they do that in South Bend, then I'll leave at halftime again, like I did 4 years ago when it was 35-0 at the half.
Text me. Forget to text me.
Yeah. But look, it's a winnable game, especially if Jackson Dart plays, especially if the defense commits to stopping the run and forces Notre Dame to throw the ball, because I don't know that Notre Dame throws the ball that great. I just don't feel I have no confidence in USC as a football team. I don't think the coaches will get them prepared. I don't think the players will be prepared, and I don't think they'll play hard, because I watched them play too much this year to feel otherwise. But they could win this one if they show up. I hope they do.
Well, that's a nice way to transition over to Kevin. Can SC win this game?
You play this game 10 times, SC wins maybe once. But some things have to happen that haven't happened all season and frankly in many years, where they have to play a complete football game. No one is going to get any breaks playing in South Bend. I mean, the refs are going to throw penalty flags if the slightest matter comes up. I don't care what conference, split conference or however they do it. It doesn't matter. They're just not going to get the calls. Therefore, you have to going in. You're -7 easily, if not more in our case. The defense is going to have to play tough 4 quarters of football. When was the last time we saw that? It's been a long time. Certainly not by this edition of the Trojans. So that said, look, things can change. Happiness could ensue, and good things could happen. It's a possibility. I know that their tight end is back healthy, which was not great news. I mean, you don't want somebody to be hurt, but he is their number one target by far, and is very difficult to cover. And that forces our safeties to cover a tight end, which I don't know when I last saw that prescription. It didn't work out so well vis-a-vis Stanford, vis-a-vis Utah, right? So, hey, I don't want to be a downer about it, but the facts are the product that they put on the field is the product they put on the field. Oh, by the way, we're not the only team coming off a bye. So is Notre Dame.
Well, Scott, you have an interesting perspective because you deal in recruiting, so you're pretty aware of the talent on both teams. What's your thoughts on this game on Saturday?
Well, just like Kevin had alluded to, and I'm sure Chris did too, is that, Notre Dame is a difficult place to win, even when Notre Dame's not good, which I don't know if we would put Notre Dame in the category of not good this year, but it's not a great Notre Dame team by any stretch. I don't know what they're ranked currently, but this is the Notre Dame team that I've seen play a couple of times. Saw them give up a ton of points to Florida State. They pulled off a squeaker victory there. I really haven't seen them play a whole lot more since then. But I've got a couple of buddies that cover the team for Irish Sports Daily, and they were just kind of throwing some statistics. I'll be doing a podcast with them here in the next couple of days. But rushing yards, Notre Dame versus Florida State 65 versus Toledo 124, Purdue 120. Versus Wisconsin, 9 yards versus Cincinnati 84. And another interesting comment that they had made is that Notre Dame has played 4 left tackles this season, and they rotated in three guys at both guard spots. I mean, that's not typically something that is normal for you to see from a Notre Dame football team. So it's not like this is a Notre Dame team that has a solid roster going on right now, and it's a very, very beatable Notre Dame football team. But again, USC has not played very well this season, let alone more than 2 quarters. Definitely not 4 quarters. And if you're going to go to Notre Dame, you're going to play in a hostile environment. You're going to play against a team typically. This Notre Dame football team, coached by Brian Kelly, does not beat themselves. They've had a couple of games this year where they've had multiple turnovers and they've had more penalties maybe than they normally have. But Notre Dame is a very, very disciplined football team. So USC is going to have to go in there and they're going to have to play disciplined. And USC is going to have to make the tackles that they've been missing consistently for at least every game at the Coliseum. So do I think that USC can go and win this game? Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind that USC can go into this game and win. I really do believe whether he starts or not is irrelevant to me. I think Jackson Dart needs to be on that sideline at the very least. Otherwise,
I hate to see him come back too early. I got to tell you.
I do too.
I mean, look, chipping up his knee like that and coming back early and getting bludgeoned at Notre Dame is just a worst case nightmare. I got to tell you.
Yeah.
In my humble view. By the way, Notre Dame's ranked number 9 in the country.
All right. Thank you. I knew that. I mean, it's USC goes into South Bend and they win this football game. No matter what happens this year, that is going to be a huge victory. The USC is going to have a new head coach. They're going to have new coordinators, the whole 9 yards. That victory over Notre Dame is going to be kind of like the one that Chris was talking about in 1996. Maybe not quite to that level, but I think it's kind of, when is USC going to beat Notre Dame in South Bend again? If there was ever a year they can do it, it's this year.
All right. Well, I'm going to throw in my 2 cents here. First of all, I don't even know if Dante Williams has ever been at Notre Dame as a player, as a coach, or as a fan. And to me, that is somewhat of a factor. That he's going to be looking at something he is not prepared to see if you've never been there. But let's assume that he has his composure and everything's fine. USC, a lot of these players have not been there. Okay. And I'm concerned about that. I mean, it's very easy to get distracted at Notre Dame when you go onto that field. Okay. Very easy. I don't want to get too deep into the game part of it because we'll leave that for predictions. But, when's the last time I've ever seen Notre Dame start a transfer quarterback? Jack Cohen. He's from Wisconsin. When have I ever seen Notre Dame not be physical? When I've got to think that Notre Dame has better offensive linemen than Oregon State. And Oregon State did a great job of running the football against the Trojans. I think that Notre Dame does have a passing attack, especially against a inconsistent SC secondary, a poor tackling SC defense. There's a lot of things about SC that cause concern for me that Notre Dame can get off. Plus, Notre Dame could be very focused for this game. Notre Dame could say, look, we haven't been all that impressive, but we could score a lot of confidence points. by beating the heck out of our arch rival. So I think that USC is going to have to do something that they don't do, and to ask them to do it for 4 quarters. It's going to be a difficult task. Notre Dame has a very good defense in some areas. They're not. I don't think SC is going to outcoach Notre Dame, to be quite frank with you. And it really depends. I think in the first quarter and a half, that's going to tell you all you need to know, especially from a physical standpoint. So it's all in the barn, as they say. So let's get to overtime and our picks for this week, and we'll wrap things up. Just a reminder, as far as this week's Pac-12 schedule, ASU and Stanford have drawn byes. So that brings us to Friday night, October 22nd. Washington will be at Arizona. That's a 7:30 p.m. game scheduled for ESPN 2. Washington's a 16.5-point favorite. Kevin, what say you on this game?
Yeah, Washington wins that game.
Okay, Scott,
Washington.
Chris,
Washington easy, and don't even watch it. Or Arizona's terrible.
and I will say yes to all three of you. Washington could name the score. So much for the Jed Fish excitement over there in Tucson. All right, let's move to Saturday, October 23rd. BYU at Washington State. That's a 12:30 p.m. game on FS1. BYU is favored by 1 point. Scott, what do you think?
I'm going to go with BYU.
Okay. Chris?
I'm going to go with BYU too. I think they rally this week. Their season's starting to fall apart a little bit. I think they're a better football team than Washington State. I think they pull it together.
Kev?
Yeah, I'm just going to be a contrarian a bit here and go with Washington State just because everybody else is going for BYU.
And I am going to make a fool out of myself, not the first time, but I think I'm going to go with Washington State. I think if Deloria could stay at quarterback, and since the game is at Pullman, I agree that BYU is a very mature team and they're ready for a bounce back. If they win, won't shock me in the slightest. But Washington State's got a little something going right now. And I would say that BYU is going to have to out physical them and set the standard. So I'll go with Washington State. All right, Colorado at Cal. That's a 12:30 p.m. game, Pac-12 network. Cal is a 10-point favorite. Chris?
Yeah, Cal wins this game. Another ugly, ugly football game.
Yeah.
But they're the better team and they're at home.
Kevin?
Yeah, I picked Cal as well. And again, well said, Chris. Ugly game, just ugly.
Scott?
7-3 Cal.
Wow. Okay. I will go with I guess I'll go with Cal because I think Colorado has no offense, but I don't think Cal's offense is all that great either. But we'll give a charity point for the game being played in Berkeley. Now, here's a very attractive game to me. Number 10, Oregon at UCLA. That's a 12:30 p.m. game on ABC. UCLA is a 2.5-point favorite. Kevin, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, can they both lose?
We can put that up for auction.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. Well, golly, this just hurts. I got to take, who do I dislike the most? That's a tie too. Oh, gracious. I think UCLA wins because Oregon couldn't field an entire team because most of them were in their probation program.
All righty. Scott?
I'm going to go with UCLA because I think they're going to run the ball and be successful.
Okay.
You're watching, if you watch the Cal Oregon game, I mean, if Cal had the ability to run the ball in Oregon, I sure as heck know UCLA will.
All righty. I think I know the answer I'm going to get to this, but fire away, Arledge.
I feel Kevin's pain here because I don't really want to pick either team. There's nobody to root for. I'm going to root for the Ebola virus, but I would like to. I think UCLA is a better football team. I agree with Scott. I think they're going to be able to run the ball on Oregon, and Oregon has been just hanging on just about every week. I don't think they look very good. I think UCLA wins the game, and it wouldn't surprise me if they won it convincingly.
Well, okay. Now I guess that takes me to me. I'm going to take UCLA. I think they are the better team. I'm not impressed with Oregon. I think when they lost the running back, they really lost something. Scott, what's the name of the running back? I'm trying
Burdell? CJ?
Yeah, CJ Burdell. Yeah, when they lost him, I think they lost a lot of their ability to strike quickly. So I'm going to take UCLA. The game's at the Rose Bowl. I think UCLA, this could actually be their season in a way for the rest of the way, and we'll find out. So the vote for me is UCLA. Now, here's an interesting one. Utah at Oregon State, 4:30 p.m., Pac-12 Network. Utah is favored by 3 points. Scott, what do you think on this one?
You know what? I'm going to go with Utah. I think Utah actually, Utah looked better than I thought. Well, everybody's looked better than I thought they would against USC, but Utah then went and they looked pretty unimpressive the way they came back against a pretty good ASU team. So I think Utah is the team to beat in the South, and I think they're going to win this football game.
Okay, Chris.
Utah's trending up. Oregon State is trending down. But I think the Beavers pull it out at home. It's a tough place to play. I think they turn it around, and I don't think Utah's that great. I think they're about due for a 3 turnover loss.
Kevin?
Yeah, I think it's going to be closer than people think, but I think Utah's going to pull this one out.
I'm going to go with Oregon State because I think Utah could be a little down after that victory they had at ASU. But I think that Oregon State is very disciplined. I think Utah is very disciplined for the most part. And I think if the game wasn't at Research Stadium in Corvallis, I might go with Utah. But something tells me that Oregon State is going to give them a run for their money. So I'm going to take the home team, Oregon State, on this one. But again, I wouldn't be shocked if Utah wins it, which takes us to the last game. The University of Southern California at Notre Dame, 4:30 p.m. kickoff on the West Coast. It's on NBC. Again, those of you that are going to the game, it's 7:30 game. And a reminder for those of you that are going to the game, there is a 1 hour time difference between Chicago and South Bend. So kind of keep that in mind when you start fixing your clock and deciding when you're heading out to South Bend on the Indiana Tollway. Notre Dame is favored at this point. It's by 6 points. Is that accurate, Chris?
That shows that people are seeing the same Notre Dame team that I'm seeing. It's not a great Notre Dame team, as we talked about. That being said, USC hasn't shown up in weeks, and I don't have any reason to suspect that will change. I think the Irish probably put it away in the first half. But I'd really like to think the Trojans can keep it close in the fourth and see if we get lucky. But no, I'm picking the Irish as much as I hate to, and I don't think it's going to be competitive.
Scott, are you picking the Irish, and do you think it's not going to be competitive?
Well, the last time I made a prediction was for the Colorado game, and that was at the time it didn't seem that easy. But I took USC by 20 that game. I'm going to take USC by 2 touchdowns in this one.
All righty. We'll get that on the Associated Press wire. That'll be a 5 bell.
Yes.
Okay.
I will remind you. Nobody will remember if I'm wrong, but if I'm right, I'll remind you guys for like 4 straight weeks.
And we have confidence that you would definitely do that.
I'm going to remember, Scott.
You're no fun.
All right, KB, El Capitan. What's your thoughts?
Regrettably, but Notre Dame's going to win this one, and it's not going to be close.
All right. and that comes to me. And unfortunately or fortunately, I'm going to say that Notre Dame is going to win really big. And how big they do it will be how big they get a lead in the first half. And if they start rolling, it's going to be ugly. Notre Dame is still a physical football team. I don't think they've played their best game yet. I think they have issues. Obviously, Scott pointed out all the changes along the offensive line, but when push comes to shove, this SC team doesn't inspire me. I think Chris brought it up almost every time we have one of these inside the huddles. This team doesn't play with a lot of heart. SC doesn't play with a lot of heart. I can see this team basically looking with huge eyes, deer in the headlights look, once Notre Dame starts cranking it up and they play the victory clog after every touchdown. So I think it's not going to be a pretty sight. I hope it is, but there's only one way to find out, and that is to play in the game. So with that in mind, guys, I want to thank you. A reminder to everyone that USC does play at Notre Dame this Saturday night on NBC, 4:30 p.m. in Southern California, 7:30 p.m. in South Bend. Reminder, next Tuesday, we'll review the Notre Dame game, preview the Trojans' homecoming game against Arizona. So until next Tuesday, thank you again, panel. Thank you to our On3 technician, Jake Evans. Thank all of you for watching or listening to Inside the Trojans Huddle on WeAreSC. And fight on, everybody.